What's that place you've always wanted to try? Well, you're there, sharing plates with...
Just one bite.
Or on second thought, maybe not sharing. It's that good. When you're with Amex, it's not if it's going to happen, but when. American Express. Don't live life without it.
Hey, it's me, your Uncle Cooper. Sorry to interrupt your music. I do love music, especially when it's set at a reasonable volume. You know, music is really only as good as your speakers. The same is true for minivans. A minivan is only as good as the tires it sits on. And the button on the screen there, it agrees with me. If you click on it, it'll bring you to all the Cooper minivan tires that'll make your minivan a really good minivan. Go with the Coopers! Cooper!
Hey folks, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. I'm your host Mason. Today I'm really excited to talk about this episode. By the way, this is a throwback episode. We're talking to Alexandra Heminsley, author of Running Like a Girl and Leap In. Alex overcame a deep fear of water to eventually become an open water swimmer or an open ocean swimmer. Both of Alex's books are written to provide inspiration to get over, fear, get off the couch, and to do something out of your comfort zone that gets you, that might help you discover a new passion. I'll admit, when I was younger, college age, high school and college age, I was absolutely petrified of speaking in front of people. I'm talking, I would rather die than speak in front of people, and I'm sure a lot of y'all feel the same way. And I remember I was getting ready to give a talk or something at school, it was speech class or something, and I was shaking. I couldn't sleep. It was on the verge of a panic attack. I just don't know what it was. It was so overwhelming, and I remember my mom talking to me like, hey, it's going to be okay. She was concerned by how much I was affected by it, and I remember getting up there and not even being able to talk. I couldn't even open my mouth. And the teacher was like, what did you study? And I said one word answers. I was like, I don't even know what we were talking about, but I said the subject the talk was about. And she asked follow-up questions, and it was one word answers for about 5 minutes until she just gave up. And I went and sat down. And I don't think I've ever felt more humiliated. And I thought, I'm never going to speak again. I'm never going to be a speaker, never going to talk. Well, guess what? When you start doing adventures and you do them for causes, people want to hear about them. People ask you to come talk to their group. And that same feeling kept coming up over and over and over. And I would continue just facing it and dealing with it. And eventually it was like, oh my gosh, people laughed at that. People thought that story was really cool. People loved the talk, loved to hear about biking across America, for instance. And the craziest thing began to happen. I began to fall in love with it. And I would say right now, 20 years later, however many years later from that day, actually, no, that was probably closer to 10, 15 years, I love speaking in public. It still gives me butterflies. I'm still nervous, but it's a thrill. It's a thrilling thing. It's like starting at a race or lining up for a marathon. You're still nervous. You still have butterflies, but you know what's on the other side. You know it's at the finish line. And I know this is a super long intro, but I just want to say, if you're out there dealing with something, maybe it is literally the ocean. I'm still afraid of the ocean, even though I'm learning to deal with that too, living here at the ocean and paddleboarding as much as possible. But there might be something, a passion behind that fear or on the other side of that fear if you just keep going. As long as you're not putting yourself in crazy danger, that kind of fear is legitimate. Give it a shot and keep going forward. You never know. I love speaking now. I'm talking right now. You're probably like, okay, Mason, shut up. Let's get on with the show. This is how much I love to talk now. And that was never the case. And I never thought that was going to be the case when I was first learning how. So yeah, just a little bit of encouragement before we jump in. But anyway, let's go ahead and hear from
Hello, friends. Thank you again for listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast. Today, we have a wonderful lady from the United Kingdom here, Alexandra Heminsley, who is going to be sharing with us how she spent her 20s being non-sporty. She said that she discovered running, and that was her gateway drug into adventure sports. She's written 2 books on her favorite sports, her most recent being on swimming and overcoming huge challenges to learn how to do the swimming events that she does. She grew up in the UK. She was in London for about 10 years and more recently moved to Brighton, where she has found her love living near the coast. And I am excited, Alex, to visit with you today about running and swimming and learning how to do these things a little bit later in life.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I was the person that did nothing, and I thought that being sporty was like a gene or something that you were given at birth. I didn't really understand for a really long time that being sporty or just really only necessitated doing some sport.
Good
The
point.
penny has finally dropped.
Right. Well, with the Olympics going on, I've mentioned this in a recent show as well, we see the giants of the sports.
Yeah.
And I think it can be intimidating. We think, oh, I can't do that, But no, we can do what we can do, right? In our own way. And
Yeah,
that's what makes us
exactly.
sporty. We don't have to be a world champion necessarily.
No, and also I think a lot of places that sell sports wear and sports kit and equipment, they tend to use the elites or the people that look as if they're extremely comfortable playing sport already. And so that if you haven't grown up with a family that was doing things and been in relationships when you had a sporty boyfriend that was patient with you, so setting you up on a bicycle or whatever, it can be really intimidating because you're going into a shop that covered all the outside of those big brands is people who already look as if they've got all of the gleaming benefits of sport from them, and it can feel like a world that's perfectly happily going on without you and you're not invited, but you are.
I get it. Absolutely. So you've written 2 books on the subject, and these are books that help people through humor and sharing your own story. They help people to realize that this is an inclusive thing. Everybody can do this.
Yes, exactly. And that what you get out of it doesn't have to be your salary or gold medals or global acclaim. It can be as much as, half an hour headspace to yourself going around the park 3 times a week. That will enrich your life enormously. It doesn't mean that it's not worth doing because you won't win a marathon and, feel the tape cross your chest first when you cross the finish line before everyone else. It's still worthwhile and enriching and sort of a little magic bit of space in otherwise busy lives.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, now that we know what we're going to be talking about today, let's rewind a little bit and talk about Alex. Give us your backstory, a little bit about how you grew up and how you transitioned into being a sporty person.
Yes. Well, my dad was in the military, and I was the oldest. So I have a brother and a sister, so there was 3 of us, and we were all running around all the time, causing chaos. And we weren't a family that sort of did sporty stuff. It wasn't like we were sort of team players. It wasn't one of those families whose weekends were arranged around sports matches the way that some people are. But my dad was a really big runner when we were little. And I just sort of thought, we were kids, we were wearing shorts and T-shirts. And my dad was wearing shorts and T-shirts a lot of the time. And I was quite young. And I don't think I realised that he was doing a lot of running. And then I grew up, I left home, and my dad's quite a taciturn man. He's quite a kind of, if you were to imagine an Englishman in the army, you would not be far wrong if you just went for a stereotype with my dad. Whereas my mum grew up in the West Indies. She's very Latin, she's very chatty, and so are me and my sister. And so I grew up, I moved to London, I was working in publishing, all of this time passed. And then my sister got married and she's younger than me and I was a bit glum. And this was like 10 years ago. And I went to go and stay with my folks in the countryside. And my brother was saying he had got a place he wanted to do the London Marathon. And I said, oh, I'd love to be able to run. And I can remember it like it was yesterday. My dad was getting a cup from a kitchen cupboard. So his head was sort of slightly in the cupboard and his voice came back quite magnified. And he said, oh, it's not that you can't run, it's that you don't. And suddenly I felt like, someone had opened a door and there was a whole room in the house that I'd never noticed before or something. And I realised he was right. So I got a place and I did the London Marathon and I really found myself in running. It was sort of a bit of a lonely time for me, and it taught me so much about self-esteem and grit and positivity and self-reliance and community, because obviously so many marathons are to do with fundraising, and it really was one of the most important relationships, I suppose, of my life. And it also taught me a lot more about my dad, who I realised had been, while he had 3 young children, he'd run 15 marathons.
Wow.
Was sort of barely mentioning it. It was just his little escape in a busy life. And then I carried on running. In the end, I did 5 marathons, and I wrote about them in Running Like a Girl, which I wrote particularly because at that point, and it has changed now a lot, I wrote Running Like a Girl in 2012 and it was published in sort of middle of 2013. But at that point, it was a bit of a boys' club running. It was the way that women were sold running was to a weight loss. It was to get a bikini body. And if you wanted to buy a book about running, they were very a hardcore narrative endurance stories. It was, kind of day 5 in the desert and my feet were worn away to stumps.
Right.
And if you just kind of want to get round the park and 5K feels like a really big deal to you, it's just like you would just think, well, what's the point? I'm not going to the desert. Get through the school run at this point is exhausting to me. So obviously this is not a book for me. But obviously it was also quite uncomfortable for a lot of women, for this feeling that running should be to achieve something else, that it wasn't of worth or joyful in itself, which is absolutely true. But this idea that it was some sort of penance you had to do to look better for everyone else's sake, or to weigh a bit less, or to fit into the running clothes that were available to you. And so I wanted to write a book that was about somebody who was not the woman that looked like she would be photographed on the outside of a sports store, that was, did wobble and jiggle when she ran and didn't understand what half the things in the goodie bag after a marathon were for. And and it turned out I wasn't the only woman like that. And it's sold in 15 different countries now. And it's just, I still hear from people every day who have kind of realised it's not just them that thought that running wasn't, that they weren't invited into the world of running.
Oh, yeah. And so the book you're talking about there is Running Like a Girl, correct?
Yes. So, yeah, it really did. Running changed my life, and Running Like a Girl changed my life. And so consequently, I was very confident that just all you need is a can-do attitude and a little bit of cardiovascular strength and you'll be fine. So then I'd done all this marathon training at home in Brighton, going up and down the seafront. There's a lovely flat seafront for miles in Brighton, so you can really run and see the horizon for the whole time, and it's absolutely mesmerising. But I'd never gone in the sea, and then I did on the morning of my wedding, and it was absolutely beautiful. It was like a once-in-a-lifetime beautiful, when the sea is all sort of milky and opaque, it's so still. And then I sort of thought, oh, brilliant, I'm just going to get into swimming now. And then got back in. I thought, oh, maybe, I'm sure I could swim when I was little on holiday. I'll do like a 1-day taster course. It'll be fine. And I got in, and the sea was very different the second time. And it was really choppy. And I had a massive panic attack. I just felt completely out of control. Then the next time I went in, we just got back from honeymoon, and my husband's wedding ring just washed off and went away, never to be seen again. And then our house flooded, and I just thought, this is it. I have to kind of conquer the sea now. Like I was becoming more and more afraid. So I went right back to the beginning, and I realized I couldn't swim front crawl at all. I confidently thought that I could. I had this vague memory of swimming on some holiday, but you never really swim properly. You're just cooling down on holiday.
Right.
So I learned to swim from scratch with the goal that I wanted to swim to Ithaca. I wanted to be my own Odysseus and reach the island of Ithaca in Greece.
So how far is that?
It was a 5K swim, which isn't the longest. I think it's sort of the equivalent of doing maybe a half marathon. It's like about it was 2 to 3 hours, depending on conditions.
So a 5K swim, so that's 3.2 miles.
Yes.
And that got you from where to Ithaca?
It was a boat quite close to Kefalonia, to Ithaca, but it was sort of making my way to Ithaca because I studied classics when I was at university, and I was obsessed by the Odyssey and Odysseus, and his, the whole of the Odyssey is his journey trying to get back to his home island of Ithaca, and I had it in my head that I wanted to be a hero too, and the most heroic thing you could do is to be like a Greek hero and swim to Ithaca.
That's great. So was it part of an event, or did you just set up your own goal? I'm going to do this, and then you did it.
It was like a swimming holiday that had a series of swims in the Greek islands that culminated in this one. So I had never. There's something very satisfying about swimming between two islands, even if it is only an hour-long swim. There's a sense of accomplishment. But then obviously there's more to see if you're swimming round an island because you're in shallower water, and in Greece there's all sorts of beautiful fish and starfish and rocks and things to see. So the trip was a combination, like a variety of different swims between islands and round islands, and the culmination of the week was the Ithaca swim, the heroic swim.
Well, that's beautiful. I think it's fun when you have something that it kind of becomes a goal, something you've dreamed about, and maybe you relate it to, like you did, the Odyssey, right? And
yeah,
and that becomes bigger than life almost, and it pulls you along, and then eventually you accomplish that. It's got to be so exciting.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one for British people is swimming the Channel, going from Dover to Calais, which is really interesting at the moment politically, because it's this sort of iconic swim of the sort of archetypal, sturdy Victorian kind of doing valiant breaststroke in their top hat. And but the French literally never, they don't care. It's the same swim, same distance. No French people are struggling and dreaming of swimming to the UK. They just don't do it. And it was when I realised that, I was like, everyone's big goal is so personal to what their goals in life are and what their experiences so far have been. It's just the minute you say to someone, "Oh, I'm having swimming lessons at the moment," they'll say, if you're in England, "Oh, I suppose you're going to swim the Channel then." And if you're in France, they go, "Great, enjoy your swimming lessons."
There you go. Well, why do you think that is?
I think that the UK is like an island nation. We're separated from the rest of Europe physically. So the idea of being able to get there to the mainland, as it were, under your own steam is a huge sense of achievement. But to the French, it's like, well, what are we doing? Why would you go that way? There's the whole of Europe over here. It's brilliant. Why would you want to go to the little bit that's sort of dangling off the end of the continent?
Well, there's been that friendly and not so friendly rivalry between Britain and France for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah, well, exactly. And it's a bit embarrassing, Brexit is mortifying, and people are still going, "Oh, I'm going to swim to France." It's like, what are you doing? You're not going to be able to get a train there soon.
Oh,
you
boy.
better learn to swim.
Yeah, I'm sure that some people say, "Don't you know that there's a tunnel now?"
Yeah, guys. But yeah, that when I was researching the book and I realised that the French just weren't swimming back, I looked at my Ithaca swim again, and I saw how everyone's goal is so personal to where they are, and that's why sometimes all the sort of clock watching entering of events that we do can be counterproductive to the actual enjoyment of using our bodies. So yes, it was interesting, a moment of clarity about the perception of goals.
Yeah. You mentioned that when you started running, it gave you a sense of self-esteem and self-reliance, and used several other adjectives there that were beautiful about how it impacted you as a person away from running. Will you explain that for us a little bit? How is it that starting being active, doing something as simple as running, did all of that for you?
Well, on the absolutely most basic level, it just is sort of it opens your mind to the possibilities that you have for yourself when you've perceived yourself to not be able to do something, and then you try it. And you can at whatever level. I thought I was not sporty and I was not a runner. And the fact that it took me a couple of months to be able to comfortably run 5K, it was extraordinary to me, because I realized that a lot of the barriers that I had about myself, and then the process of writing the book taught me that it was the barriers that so many of us have about ourselves, are not actually there. They're entirely self-perceived. Obviously, some people have, problems with their ankles or gait or cardiovascular issues. But on the whole, the people that aren't running aren't those ones. They're the ones that are saying, I can't because I can't, or I can't because I wouldn't be very good at it. It doesn't matter if you're not very good at it. It matters if you enjoy it. It matters if it enriches your life. And that was the most basic realization, was this understanding that those barriers were self-perceived, absolutely self-perceived. And then there's something really intoxicating about following a marathon training program, because it is quite sort of systematic. It's quite, you do your long runs to improve your distance, and you do some interval training to improve your cardiovascular, and you do some other more basic runs to get used to time on your feet and keep your fitness up. And you do for months on end. Every week you're just a little bit better than you were the week before. And life is not generally that sort of that much of a straight line.
Right.
It's so random, and you come across so many sort of unexpected bumps in the road, as it were. But with marathon training, obviously you have a week where you've got terrible flu or whatever. But that process, when you take it sensibly over 6 months, is so rewarding to feel your sort of sense of self slowly improve and change. And it taught me a lot about my physical self-esteem, that my legs could take me places. I learned, it was when I just moved to Brighton that I started really, really running. I learned all about my city, what it's like when you've got a run and you've got to do 14K and you realise you've done 13.2. So then you just have to loop round a couple of streets that you would never normally walk down. They're totally out of your way for anything practical, and then you just run down them and realise there's a really beautiful building at the end of one of them, or something like that. And I learned about my city. I learned about my body, just about, when you exercise more, you do almost instinctively eat better. So that changed. And my relationship with clothes, if I couldn't fit into skinny jeans before, I felt bad about myself. And then I started to think, well, actually, I've got kind of muscly legs now. I don't want to fit into skinny jeans. And you'd hold them up in the shop and think, where would I ever get with legs that could fit in those? And so it was a sort of self-realization, and also sort of self-acceptance that was extremely rewarding.
I love it. That's a beautiful story. I love what it did for you. And it's like it gave you a new direction in life and a new avenue to enjoy.
It's really important to say at this point that all of this running I was doing and all of this healthy eating and stuff, I still do not and never have run fast marathons. And this is not the story of how I became someone who's knocking out a 3-hour 20 marathon and going home and just having a light rice cake or something. I am profoundly average at running, and it's not that I got really, really good at it. It's this, it made me really, really happy.
Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible.
Your favorite band's about to play a sold-out show. You got in.
Over here!
With a friend. And found a spot close enough to see the set list. They're definitely playing your song. When you're with Amex, it's not if it's going to happen, but when. American Express. Don't live life without it.
Okay, season 2, here we come.
The Kardashians are back on Hulu.
We're back, in case you missed us.
This September.
We are starting to talk wedding dresses.
Everything gets elevated.
I do believe in love. When you love, you know you're alive. You have these feelings.
No matter how crazy things are, we're always going to be family.
Now hold your crown up.
The Kardashians Season 2, now streaming only on Hulu.
That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode.
You know, what's funny about it is you're kind of saying that you're not doing it to win, but you're winning in a bigger way anyway.
Exactly. It's exactly that. And it takes quite a long time to go to a running club or take part in a half marathon and not mind that for a long time I was quite caught up in the sort of, if I did this much training, I could maybe get myself down to, under 2-hour half marathon or something. And then I realized that actually the thing that I enjoyed about going on these runs wasn't just looking at my watch and seeing if I could, it's a lot of hours that you spend to shave, 15 minutes off a time or something. Right. I really enjoyed looking around and seeing the sky and feeling my heartbeat raise and not having to look at a watch and do the sort of giant maths project that sometimes long distance running can, you end up dividing things by dividing amounts by amounts for so long that you sort of sometimes, the numbers are all spinning in your head when you start to get tired.
It sounds like a bad dream.
Yeah, sometimes it felt like a bad dream. When you've got to readjust your minutes per mile and all of that kind of thing. It's so hard. For me, it's hard. I don't do terribly well with mental arithmetic on the hoof like that. So yeah, it was that kind of challenge. It held no appeal to me.
Well, that's neat. And so people can learn more about that with Running Like a Girl. In this book, you tell your story of discovering to run, right? Now, tell us a little bit, is this a how-to guide for other people to learn how to run, or is it more of a memoir about your experiences?
It's a little bit of both. It's mostly memoir because I felt like the most effective way to persuade people to run was not to write a book going, you should go for a run, you should run, enjoy running.
Right.
I thought, actually, I don't need to persuade people who don't want to go for a run. What I need to do is to show the people who were like me that felt like they wanted to go for a run but probably couldn't, that it was doable, and that the most effective way to do that was to tell my story. At the back, I would say probably the last quarter has got the sort of everything you wanted to ask but were too afraid to section. And it's got things like what to put in your kit bag that no one will tell you when you're doing your first event, or everything you want to know about injury that you worry about in the middle of the night kind of section.
Okay.
So it's mostly memoir.
Well, let's talk about the second book. I'm excited about this swimming thing. I love the running as well, but the idea of swimming in the Mediterranean to islands, Greek islands, that sounds so exciting to me. The book is called Leap In, A Woman, Some Waves, and the Will to Swim, right? That's a subtitle.
Yes.
And this is your more recent book. It's been in hardback here, available in the United States for, it sounds like about 9 months or so, but the paperback is coming out very soon. So we should tell people what this is. So what about Leap In?
Well, Leap In is sort of the continuation of the story. After I'd written Running Like a Girl, I was writing what turned out to be a terrible book, which is now in the bin, file deleted. It was about boxing and ballet and gender in sport, and I was taking kickboxing lessons and I was doing ballet lessons at the Royal Academy of Ballet in London. And while I was doing this, I was taking swimming lessons because it was really just like a hobby thing. I had done a lot of running up and down in Brighton along the seafront, looking at the sea, and never got into the sea until the morning of my wedding. I had this big build-up of rage with the sea, with it flooding my house and stealing my husband's wedding ring. So I thought, I'm going to just learn from scratch. And I took this fantastic course that's down here in Brighton called Pool to Pier, because we have two beautiful piers in Brighton. And so the idea was that you learn to swim in the pool during the winter with a view to be able to swim out to the pier in the summer. And so it started off, taught me front crawl from scratch, and then by the summer was in the sea, reunited with my nemesis. And what happened was I took the course and I loved the course, and I really learned that not only did I love swimming, but I loved the sea. It was like the next ramped up next stage of enjoying nature and the elements that running had given me. The sea was just this huge, big next step. And then what happened was I did this swim to Ithaca, and I had other dramatic swims planned. And at that point, I was still thinking that the only sort of endeavours worth doing were the big, heroic, long, dramatic sounding ones. And then I needed to have a lot of IVF treatment, fertility treatment, and it made me feel terrible, and I couldn't really run during it, and I had problems getting pregnant, and I had a miscarriage, and it was a really, really emotionally challenging time for me. And for the previous 5 or 6 years, when I was having any kind of emotional difficulties or stresses or whatever, I had had running to fall back on, but my body was quite weakened by this, and I didn't feel very comfortable. All the sort of processes of IVF meant that running was not at all comfortable for me. And what happened was that instead of doing bigger, longer, more dramatic swims, I ended up swimming through the winter. And I completely fell in love with cold water swimming and the total visceral thrill of continuing to get in the water as the temperature drops and drops and drops and drops. Wow. And again, as with that marathon journey, it was this process of every day just demanding a tiny bit more of yourself than the day before, and it being okay. It's obviously it would feel horrendous and would be very bad for you, especially bad for your heart. Don't ever do it. If you'd never got in the sea before and you got into a freezing cold sea in January. But it's that thing of I didn't at any point go, oh, this is a nightmare, I'm going to take up cold water swimming to help me get over it. I just didn't stop. And it got to the clocks have changed in October, and I carried on. And I can remember I swam around the pier on Halloween in the dark with a group of friends, and I could see kids on the pier, and they thought that they were like monsters in the sea, and it was us in a wetsuit. So, and then I stopped swimming with my wetsuit, and I carried on, and then it got to sort of Christmas, and I said, well, maybe I'll stop on Christmas Day, and then it got to New Year, and maybe I'll stop on New Year's Day, and I just carried on and on, this sort of feeling of, no, I can take it. I can still take it. I've got a little bit more grit in me. No, there's still a little bit more. I'm still good. And then before I knew it, spring was coming back round, and it was really like a thread that kept me going. Was this? This isn't going to be the week I'm going to give up. I've got this tiny little bit more, and it was something that emotionally, psychologically, absolutely kept me going in what then felt like my absolute darkest hour.
Now, I want to make sure that the listeners got a hold of that. You're talking about this swimming through the wintertime without even a wetsuit.
Yes, yeah. So it wasn't just about exercise. It was about nature and endurance and exploring parts of myself that maybe I didn't know about before, but also exploring nature, the sea. It was that you don't ever really truly know what's swimming underneath you in the sea.
Right.
Just the same as you don't ever really know what's coming next in life. You can't know, but you can't not ever do anything fun. You got to do both. And that's what taught me.
Oh, I love it. It's a beautiful story. And the whole idea of, well, I didn't set out to swim around the year, but I just kept going, and next thing you know, I'd done it. The finding out what you're made of.
Yeah, it was. It really, really was. And now it's something almost, these days you say you've run a marathon and people practically shrug. Everyone runs all the time. But if you say, oh, no, I swim through the year, people really are surprised. They think it's some sort of self-flagellation. It's like, no, I love it. I couldn't be without it now. And then I did get pregnant, and I have a baby now who's 10 months old. And this time last year, I was quite heavily pregnant and was still swimming. I swam until 2 weeks before he was born. And that was only because the weather was bad that I stopped. And it was a real source of solace during, quite a difficult pregnancy. And it never felt like a kind of macho thing to do, but the immersion in the sea and the immersion in cold water it's such a sense of freedom and sort of self pride almost that
Sure.
you can still go out there and do it.
It's exhilarating, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and also especially with salt water, swimming is a very kind form of exercise. I've swum all over now, and you really see people, especially in cold water, you see scars and illness and people who get in looking really, hunched over, uncomfortable with themselves. And you can never tell who's going to be the one. But then you see these people and they hit the water and they have the most beautiful, confident, calm, streamlined swimming stroke. And you just think, this is where you're free. This is where you're you. And all these people who are otherwise finding getting around difficult or don't feel their best selves out of the water, then will get in the water and transform. It's such a beautiful thing to see. And it taught me a lot about how kind exercise can be when you're having a tough time as well.
Wow, that's beautiful. I think so many people want to give up when life gets hard, or they think, oh, I can't do it now because of X, Y, or Z. But what you're saying is that the water welcomes people, supports them, and allows them to continue on.
Yeah.
Even when they have some hardship, they're difficult to deal with.
Definitely. And I think a lot of people don't swim. I think it's especially something that happens with women now because of this idea of, being judged in a swimming costume or getting to the water. And the most important thing I would want people to know about swimming is that if you can, it does feel, I know what they mean. It's awful when you're not used to it and you kind of walking in your bare feet and you can feel your thighs sort of juddering behind you, and it can feel like a marathon in itself getting to the water's edge, whether it's a pool or the sea or wherever. But the time that you spend in the water is so wonderful and so good and happy making and exhilarating compared to the potential grimness of that walk. And the time that you spend is so much longer than that walk is, that if you can just do the walk of doom a handful of times, you'll realize how massively the equation is tipped in your favor. In a matter of seconds to get into the water for even just 20 minutes or half an hour in the water is still hugely in your favor in terms of time spent. And people put off these things for the fear of the bit that comes first. But once you've done it a handful of times, you realise you don't even notice you're too busy thinking about the swim or the water or what's the tide doing or how many lengths can I fit in while I've got childcare this lunchtime or whatever. And suddenly this world is opened up to you. And also a world of self not love is closed down to you because it ceases to be important. If something you love is just within reach, then the bit that's difficult seems so much more bearable.
You were talking about the little something that you overcome to do the big something that you love. And
yeah,
I'm sure that
exactly.
you had that experience with running as well. It's a matter of getting yourself up and putting on the gear and making yourself to take the first 2 or 3 steps.
Oh, definitely.
With every adventure sport or every activity that's worth doing, there are obstacles, things that we have to overcome, right? So that we can get out and do what we love to do. And that's what our show is all about, the Adventure Sports Podcast. It's about saying, hey, just try it. Overcome those obstacles. Just go out and do something and see how rewarding it can be. The way you're talking about swimming is amazing to me. It's like you have found an amazing passion in your life.
Yeah. And the reason that these things like adventure sports or swimming or anything feels exhilarating is because there is an element of risk that you've chosen to overcome. Obviously it's a bigger risk if you jump off the end of a pier and having never swum before. That's a ridiculous risk. But I recently interviewed a really amazing author called Neil Ansell. I don't know if you will have heard of him. He wrote a book that was published about 5 years ago in the UK about how he went and lived in complete isolation for 5 years in a cottage in the middle of the countryside in Wales. And he had no electricity, no water, nothing. And the book that I was speaking to him about was about he went on 5 trips over the course of a year while his health was failing to the West Highlands of Scotland. And I was asking him about risk because, he takes really big risks. He fell down like a ravine head first, and his hearing was failing, so he was much less aware of his surroundings, but he was still wanted to hear several of his favourite bird calls for the last time. And I asked him, I said, it's a pretty risky business going on here. What did your family think? And he put it really beautifully that it's the risk that is, it's the assessment of the risk that reminds you that you're alive, that you have something worth protecting and living to its best. If you don't ever think about risk, you don't think about what it is you want to preserve and keep and do well. So it's not just like the kind of high of jumping off a bridge that is, people think, oh, you just love risky sports because they're risky. Well, it's not that bit of the risk. It's the thinking about, no, I love my life. I want to come home to my family. But considering risk forces you to be mindful of. And it was, I'd never thought of it that way before. And it was a really kind of beautiful way of, he could, by the end of the interview, I was ready to do anything. I was like, oh my God, you've convinced me, I'll do whatever it is. I'm just going to consider risk. But I didn't. I went home and fed my baby.
Well, I don't know. Some people would say that swimming in the sea in the wintertime is pretty risky. You're doing that?
Yeah, but that's the thing. I do it, but I do it safely, and I check the tides, and I make sure there's no bad currents. And I know a few times I've got to the edge of the water, and even when the forecast wasn't that bad, I've thought, no, it's not worth the risk. And then you go home and you think, well, I got to the water's edge and I made a choice, and I choose to preserve me and preserve a mother for my son and all the rest of it. And that is, I think that is a really intrinsic part of doing adventurous things, is making a decision every time to what your life is worth, and it's worth a lot, so you want to fill it with good things, but also make an assessment every time of what you don't want to do.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think you don't always think about the times that you think absolutely not to something, because then you do something else. But yeah, it's very valuable in reminding you of yourself, what value you hold.
You mentioned that at the end of Running Like a Girl, you had a section on, all the answers to the questions that people don't even know that they need to ask, or maybe they're afraid to ask. Let's do the same thing for swimming a little bit. So what are the risks that you encounter when you're going out cold water swimming? Let's just go there.
Well, it's what it does is it constricts the blood vessels quite quickly. That's what is good in some ways. That's why you see pictures of Olympians standing in their bath full of ice cubes, is that promotes recovery. But they generally just put their legs in. Obviously, when you're in water, your vital organs are in the water too, so it can put pressure on the heart. I mean, there are obviously sort of common sense things to be considered, like don't go into a river where there's an obvious tree trunk that you could impale yourself on, and keep an eye on tides and make sure that you're not going for a swim somewhere that you're not going to be able to get back out of, and that sort of stuff. But the primary thing with cold water swimming is it's the effect on your heart that the cold water has. And then also with, because obviously the equation is simple. You're either going to warm the water up or the water's going to cool you down. And you are a lot smaller than the sea.
Not much of a chance there.
In the bath, you stand a chance, but in the sea, you don't. And also, if you are suffering from hypothermia, unfairly, I think, one of the first symptoms is that you feel incredibly warm. It's sort of your body kind of shutting down as you go, actually, I'm starting to feel okay. So you have to build up an awareness of how much time you can spend in the water. You should never go in November and try and swim for an hour and see if you can do it. You should try and swim for 8 minutes and see if you can do it, and then the next time try and do 10 minutes and build up, because it is really, really different. But that's what's good about it, is that it's understood that the reason it is good for our immune systems is that it gives a mild stressor, is the term that they use. It gives your immune system a mild stressor frequently. So it's effectively keeping your immune system on its toes. It's reminding it to keep working. Rather than, just lying on the sofa, your immune system just kind of goes to sleep. You can see why. It's not busy. Whereas if you just give it a nudge a few times a week, it kind of, it's mindful to do more for you. And there's increasing research there's a lot being done at the moment, and there's some research that cold water, whether it's in the sea or bathing, I think there's German research of people just literally sitting in cold baths, and the mental health benefits are they're great. It's the invigorating thing, but also they're starting to study more about with swimming. Because you have to have regulated breathing when you're swimming, it calms you down. I always say that running calms me down, and swimming requires that I'm calm to be able to do it.
Right.
You can't swim stressed, because your body's natural instinct to go when you're anxious. You're filled up with a kind of bag, basically, of carbon dioxide, which means that you're dragging air along with you, which slows you down, which means you won't be able to do it. So in order to get anywhere with swimming, especially with cold water swimming, you have to become incredibly good at giving really big, deep exhales. Learning to swim is basically learning to breathe really well. And that in turn has huge mental health benefits. And, even an Apple Watch is always telling you to breathe better. And swimming is the ultimate version of that.
So you mentioned two benefits for swimming, cold water swimming even. One was stimulating your immune system to stay awake and keep working. The other was the mental health benefits. What other benefits do you think that people get from swimming in general, warm or cold? Just how is swimming good for you?
Well, it's very kind on your joints. It's brilliant if you're training for something else, or you're doing mountain climbing or cycling or whatever, something that's putting pressure and tension on your muscles. Swimming is great for, you're so supported when you're swimming, so it enables you to exercise without putting pressure on your body in other ways.
Right.
The cold water is also brilliant for your muscles, for muscular recovery. That's why you see the athletes doing it.
I found personally that swimming helps so much with the cardiovascular. It's probably the controlled breathing.
Yeah.
But
you can't lose control of your breathing, because otherwise you just have to stop. At the moment I breathe every third breath, and I'm trying to build up so I can breathe every fifth breath, which is massively increased lung capacity. But you feel like you're doing so much more swimming, because there's kind of a lot of admin to keep breathing while you're in the water, especially if it's turbulent water. And you get so much more of the sensation of swimming if you're breathing less, but obviously you do get quite tired. So it's a bit of a challenge there.
Do you think that holding your breath between strokes can harm you in any way?
Holding your breath, definitely. You need to be exhaling while you're swimming.
Okay.
Because if you hold your breath, then you'll need to have your head out of the water for much longer because you have to let out a huge exhale and an inhale in that small second worth of time. And also, if you're holding your breath while swimming, you're holding the carbon dioxide. The waste, it's a waste product, effectively. You're holding it in your body and in your muscles. So you want to be getting it out as soon as possible, ready to just snatch in some oxygen as quickly as you can when you raise your head.
Well, here's an interesting question for you. With your book, Leap In, what do you think people will get from the book besides swimming? What are the lessons that they'll learn about life from your accounts of swimming?
I think that they will learn that the unexpected is a given in this life, just as you can never truly know if a wave is going to smack you in the face or that there's a scary big pike swimming underneath you. You can never truly know what's coming next. But that most importantly, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything. You should keep doing the things you love and do them mindfully and to the best that you can. You shouldn't just do nothing. You should leap in.
I love it. So share a couple of experiences with us, if you would, about surprising things that happened to you on your swims. You mentioned, a scary fish that could come up underneath you, that kind of thing. Have you seen these sorts of things? What's happened?
I did once I was swimming in the Lake District, and I was swimming in a beautiful lake. And just at that point, when I was sort of far enough from the edge that I knew I couldn't kind of back out, I was properly in the deep water. I did see a pike, a real ugly, creepy, almost sort of primeval dinosaur-y looking fish swim underneath me. And I don't know if you swim with goggles, but they can kind of sometimes distort distance, especially in the water. And I was doing my arm stroke, and as I brought my arm down into the water in front of me, I had no idea how far, if it was a fish that was 3 meters beneath me and there was no way I was going to touch it or whether I was going to disturb it. And that's the thing about swimming, is that the only thing that would have definitely meant that I would have created a whole load of ripples and disturbance and potentially danger would have been to stop and panic. And I just had to keep going, keep my breath steady, keep going forward, keep calm, keep smooth in the water. And I just went over him and never saw him again. I hope he's living his best life up there.
Well, Alex, I have to tell you a story that it's similar. I was swimming in a river in Florida, and the river was spring-fed, but it was also swamp-fed. So it was a mixing of the tannic waters that are browned out, you can't see anything, mixed with the clear water, from the springs. And so I had a mask on, and as I was swimming along, I couldn't see anything because I was in the brown water. And then as I swam through a spring-fed section, there was alligator gar swimming next to me. And alligator gar have needle-sharp teeth. They have big eyes, and they're 6-7 feet long. And they're right next to me, swimming right along with me, and I never knew they were there. And then, of course, the water gets kind of browned out again, and you can't see. And then the next time you pass by a little bit of that fresh water, there they are again. And I tell you what, it's an amazing experience when you see something like that. It really can give you a jolt, huh?
Exactly, but you can't ever know. But would you have not gone on that swim if you'd known?
Well, I didn't get out when I did know. Maybe that's the way I could answer that. I thought, wow, that was amazing to see. I wonder if it'll happen again, but it kind of makes you, a little nervous. You hope that they don't try to put those teeth to good use on you.
But feeling a little nervous is sometimes just reminding you how precious your life is. And that's, I can't see how that could ever be a negative thing. I love it. I had the worst time on the swim to Ithaca. I had a crazy experience. There was no kind of monster in the water, but we were swimming, and there's really strong currents in that bit of water, and I could see the island that we were aiming for, and we were passing the side of a tiny island, like, big enough to have a shepherd's hut and not much more on it. So I knew that at some point we would see the underside beneath the water of the island, and we're swimming along, and we were in sort of 4 of us in formation, and I could feel that the currents were getting stronger and stronger, and then I saw the sort of slope of the bottom part of the island appear beneath me. And I was swimming and swimming and swimming, and then I realised that the water, that what I could see, my view beneath me, was just completely static. It was like I was in a training pool. The current was so strong, and I was swimming at my hardest. I was the fittest I'd been. I'd done 2 years of swimming and lessons, and I was literally going nowhere. It was like an anxiety dream where you're just trying your hardest, and everyone's had kind of a Monday morning like that. And then, again, there was nothing to do but keep going, because to stop and panic would have just been to be taken back with the currents and to have the previous 45 minutes worth of swimming gone in minutes. And I just kept going and looking at the others and sort of trying to communicate with them while we were swimming. It was 4 of us together. And eventually, suddenly, the current just sort of shifted, and it felt like the island was just on a travelator, just moving away, because I was swimming the same amount of effort, and suddenly the island just skidded away from me. And it was like, it felt like such a physical, visible manifestation of anxiety that you have when, one of those days when no one will call you back, and you get splashed by a bus, by the going through a puddle, and you're getting nowhere, and then suddenly it's okay because you just kept going.
There's a good lesson for life right there. Just keep going. This too shall pass, and then the rewards come later, right?
Yeah.
Well, what is it like swimming around the Greek islands in the Mediterranean? Is the water warm? I know it can be very clean and beautiful, but...
It's really beautiful, but it is so salty.
Oh, really?
Like proper, almost like a vendetta level of salt, like your eyes. And we had to kind of put Vaseline all around the edges of all of our swimming costumes and just everywhere that we could, really, because it's abrasive. You can almost feel the crystals in the salt. It's so salty.
Wow.
So we had like a little dinghy going along beside us that had bottles of mouthwash in it and so much water. It made me really, when you're little and you hear stories about pirates and shipwrecks and stuff, and it made me really understand that sort of panic of being surrounded by water but it not being thirst quenching.
Right.
You can see how the sea could be a real menace when all you wanted was a glass of water.
How did it feel when you finally reached your goal?
Oh, it was amazing, and I cried, and it just meant so much to me. I'd been reading those sort of, Homer's stories of Greek gods and goddesses all my life, and actually just to see Ithaca felt really magical to me. The idea that someone could spend 10 years, the Odyssey, he's literally spending 10 years trying to get home from work.
Right.
And we've all had a journey like that in our time. And it's an extraordinarily beautiful part of the world, and it was I was there in July, so it was exceptionally sunny and gorgeous. And always in Homer, the Greek always translates as referring to the sea as wine dark, and I can kind of understand why it does almost look like a claret rather than blue. It's so dark sometimes. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, it sounds delightful. Wow. Well, this has been so much fun visiting with you about these books and about your pursuit of sports that brought new enthusiasm and meaning to life. And I just think it's wonderful. Let's real quickly talk about these 2 books. Running Like a Girl is the first book. Second book, Leap In, A Woman, Some Waves, and the Will to Swim. Are both of these available on Amazon, I assume?
Yes, yeah. And I think they're both audiobooks as well now, too. I know I get a lot of feedback from people who listen to the audio either running or swimming. So, yeah.
Now, is it recorded in your voice or someone else's?
The UK one I recorded of both of them, but I think there is also a US edition. but I don't know if you can get both in the US. I'm not sure.
I think I might like your accent better.
Yeah, thank you.
It would make it fun to listen to. That's very cool. So Leap In, this one is coming out in paperback. You said March 8th.
Yes.
And we're expecting to air this show on March 5th. So it is just like 3 days away for the listeners.
Perfect.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a delight to hear your stories. I really enjoy your passion for these sports. And thank you also for writing the books so that you can share your story and your passion with others. We appreciate that.
Oh, thank you so much for having me and letting me share my stories.
Oh, you bet.
It's been a joy.
Yeah, it's always our pleasure. Our pleasure. So keep swimming, keep running, keep doing the things you love. And for the listeners out there, remember, like I always say, until the next show, make sure that you too get out there, have some fun.
Exactly.
First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to this show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to grow in the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.
Your favorite band's about to play a sold-out show, and you definitely got tickets. And drinks. Now hurry and make it back to your spot. Past this person and that person, about 20 more. Ooh, watch out for feet.
Hey.
Just keep going. A little further. Oh, there's your friend.
Over here.
Right where you want to be. Close enough to see the set list. And they're definitely playing your song. When you're with Amex, it's not if it's going to happen, but when. American Express. Don't live life without it.
Hey, it's me, your Uncle Cooper. Sorry to interrupt your music. I do love music, especially when it's set at a reasonable volume. You know, music is really only as good as your speakers. The same is true for minivans. A minivan is only as good as the tires it sits on. And the button on the screen there, it agrees with me. If you click on it, it'll bring you to all the Cooper minivan tires that'll make your minivan a really good minivan. Go with the Coopers! Cooper!